Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Can you hear me? All right, good, thanks. I was muted because I was chewing a mint. Sometimes that doesn't unmute. We'll get started here in just a second. This session is being recorded. And one of the ways that we're tracking to see participation is Zoom will print out a report at the end. So if you are logged in using, sometimes people are logged in using an alternate computer or somebody else's device, make sure you make me aware of that if that's the case, so I know who's here. Because I will say I will remember and then I will not remember. Thank you all for coming. I think we have 13 participants signed up, so we'll wait another minute or so before we get started. All right, guys. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. Hopefully you can see the bit.ly at the bottom of this intro screen. Feel free to log into that bit.ly and it will take you through the presentation. There will be some clickable links as we go through so that you can interact as we go. And so again, this is being recorded so that anybody who wasn't able to attend today will be able to access it later. I will let you know where you can access it when we figure that out, but I'm sure it will be on Sanger Learns at some point, and we'll share that information out with teachers. So this is classroom management tips for the secondary classroom. I know I see a lot of familiar faces. Many of you were at the New Teacher Institute in August, so it's good to see you again. Thank you for coming. I wanted to switch it up a little bit, so I looked for some information that would be different and unique and really valuable, even though that first day we really had to rush through the presentation very quickly. So so hopefully this will be useful to you. For those of you who maybe haven't met me yet, my name is Rhonda Siqueiros and I work for the Curriculum and Instruction Department in Sanger Unified. I'm a district instructional specialist, but my background is in English. I was a teacher at Sanger High for 24 years in the English department before coming over to the district office. So most of the experience that I have comes from that, from the classroom, from the trenches. And so I hope that what I share today will be valuable for you starting as soon as you go back tomorrow. All right. So on we go. Let's see here. Okay, so our norms for today, I see you guys are muted. That's great, just because when there are a lot of people in a room, it's hard to hear, but feel free to unmute. Again, there are about 10 participants here, so I prefer the conversational thing. If I'm doing something weird, if my screen freezes, please somebody unmute and tell me, yell at me real quickly. Feel free to use the chat to post questions or ideas as we go through as well. And know that I want to hear from you. right? And I think we can all learn from each other. I am guessing that if you are a new teacher, you are having similar struggles. So if you unmute and ask the question, it's something we can all learn from. All right. So, and if you're able to use the video feature, that's great. So I can see who I'm talking to, but I understand sometimes the internet is a little bit, you know, so that's perfectly fine. But those are our norms for today. All right. So what we're going to talk about, a little bit of a different approach than where we were. Again, for those of you who were at the New Teacher Institute at the beginning of the year, is just to look at how veteran teachers handle classroom management compared to novice teachers. So why not look at those differences, and so we can jump right in and benefit from the things that the experts are doing already. We're going to talk about strategies and tips for an effective classroom. So things like how to plan your environment, just some things to think about outside of the traditional classroom management plans that we've already discussed a little bit. My goal for today, my personal goal, is that everyone will discover a classroom management strategy that you can utilize in your classroom in the coming days. Because I feel like when I attend a training, I want to make sure that I take something valuable with me immediately. Otherwise, it's fun to think about all the things you want to do later, but we're so busy that later is sometimes too far away, right? Okay. Whoops. Okay. So in the chat first, I'd like you to just explain just briefly why you chose to attend this session. What is it that you're hoping to gain from today's professional development? All right. So just why are you here? What are you hoping for? Take a moment to do that. So a daily schedule, good. Consistency, very important. Oh, the difference between online and a physical environment. That's a good one, Kayla. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but for sure something to explore. Good. Oh, okay, Jade, I like how you put that. The happy energy in my classroom. That's a good way to describe it. Yeah, I imagine students are excited to see each other. You don't want to discourage that, but you need to make sure it's directed in a positive way. Ryan. So, okay. Yeah, classroom management in the classroom with COVID. Good. So different issues, Rachel. Okay. Strong in management in elementary, moving on to second. Big difference. Yes, Marianne, big difference between secondary and elementary. So that's good. You'll be able to gain some knowledge from some of the people here who are doing that too. And Kevin, kids struggling, lashing out, disruptive and disrespectful. Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's why we're here, trying to get to some of that. Okay, Roberta, good. Less stress on me with redirection. Okay, yeah. So good ideas, guys. I think, like I said at the very beginning, I hope we can all learn from each other. So if you hear a scenario as we're going through and you have something that you would like to contribute, please feel free to unmute. And I think it's beneficial to take a conversational approach to a lot of this, because I know that those struggles that you're having in the classroom, that's what's important to you right now, and you're here for that fix. So we'll get there. Okay. So this slide may be familiar. Again, these are the most common components of a classroom management plan, right? So routines, procedures, expectations, and behavior management. Oftentimes when we talk about classroom management, our minds go directly to discipline, right? Or behavior management. But the reality is that if behavior management it can become the focus if other components are neglected or assumed. So if you assume that your students understand what your expectations are for them without directly explaining your expectations, then there's going to be some gaps. And so we want to make sure that we're paying attention to every single one of these components, because they work in conjunction. And looking at the slide for a moment, if you could just take one out and think about how the problems might emerge. For example, if you take out any routine that you have, where is the struggle going to be? I mentioned expectations, right? If you are inconsistent with your behavior management, what kind of troubles are going to occur in your classroom? And then procedures. Do you have a set of procedures? Have you established procedures? So I think it's clear that any one of them omitted could be problematic in all other areas. Okay, so the number one problem in the classroom is not discipline. It is the lack of authentic learning tasks, procedures, and routines. And I don't know if Harry Wong is still somebody who's discussed in teacher education programs, but forever, Harry Wong was the guru when it came to classroom management. And so again, the idea is that discipline is a result of lacking areas, lacking learning tasks. I said, and I strongly believe that student engagement is going to be the biggest tool to combat problems in your classroom. So it really starts there. And then the second, very close second, would be relationships with your students. If you get those two things going, your classroom management / discipline issues are going to be greatly reduced. All right, so let's look at what the research says. So I found a study from 2021 that examined the differences in how veteran and novice teachers handled classroom disruptions. The observers, who were largely school leaders and teacher mentors, but also new teachers, provided feedback about classroom events, and they critiqued the observed teachers' own classroom management strategies and offered solutions. So they collectively had these discussions about videos that were taken, videos that recorded incidents in classrooms of both novice teachers and experienced teachers. And these were their findings. So the first one was that both new teachers and veteran teachers tended to react to disruptions. Okay, react instead of being proactive. This is like, if it were me, full disclosure, I struggled with sarcasm and sass a little bit. So sometimes when kids say something, I reacted. That's a reaction. Hard to control. It's part of my personality. However, so that's universal. Everybody does that. But veterans were quicker to realize that the disruptions are often the result of organizational or communicative problems, and try to rectify that situation by getting to the root. And that's actually one of the trends that you're going to see with all of these findings, is that veteran teachers had a tendency to try, which is number 2, to get to the root of the problem, to find, what's going on with this kid? What can I do to prevent future disruptions from happening? Because oftentimes when a student reacts or does something inappropriate in classroom, it's part of a bigger problem. Okay, the third thing was balancing teacher authority with student autonomy. So experienced teachers are quicker to recognize how their own behavior might influence a student's reaction, and therefore recognize the need for a reasonable leeway on occasion. I mentioned my sass. Anybody else sassy? Okay, I mean, I really feel like it's a secondary teacher thing, guys. Little children scare me. I had my own little children. They didn't scare me, but I was always worried that with the littles, I would be too sassy. Like I felt like I couldn't, so maybe I was way too comfortable with the secondary kids, but I recognize sometimes that my behavior may cause a student to be overly defensive, or perhaps react in a smart aleck way back. And so sometimes not always, but sometimes there is leeway, should be leeway. The fourth thing they found was that both groups were good at circulating around the room and monitoring the room, but veterans were more efficient with proximity. And this is one of my big, important tools in terms of classroom management. Not only should you move about the room, but where you stand and who you stand next to at any given time is very important. That's something that comes with experience. And I'm not talking about years of experience, but I'm talking about getting to know your kids. When I was teaching English teachers, you'll appreciate this. When I was teaching sophomores and we're reading Julius Caesar, and every single year they laughed at Trebonius. Every single year. 15, 16-year-old boys laugh at that name. And there were some that laughed louder than others. And so I knew who I needed to go stand by the time we read Julius Caesar to try and curtail that, the outlandish behavior that sometimes accompanied that. Side note, when I told my husband that story, he also laughed. So I don't know that it's an age thing. It's just, maybe it's a guy thing. I don't know. The other thing that is important along with that number 4 is just the idea of recognizing how our tone, our facial expressions, and our posture can affect student reactions. So if you're the person who's like defensive, kind of, if that's your posture, then that can create a similar reaction from students. If your tone, like I said, sarcastic or sassy, sometimes that allows students to think that I was very conversational in the classroom, but sometimes for some kids, they need that more finite, like this is the line, the lines are blurred if you're too comfortable. And so the last one is just, I think the last one is pretty obvious, just that experienced teachers gain a different perspective and are able to pull from all of the strategies that they have come up with from those years of experience, right? And that's not something that can be done overnight. You learn based on what happens on day 4 and day 6, and that special kid who really likes to push your buttons, and all of the different tools that you'll use to try and manage that individual's behavior as you go through. So these were the five findings from from the research that was collected. 5 differences. Sometimes I push a button and it makes a really loud noise. All right. So I really like this quote. As teachers become more experienced, they undergo a shift in perspective from seeing parts versus seeing the whole. So they're not looking at just the components, they're looking at the whole kid. While novice teachers relied more on routines and consequences, essentially following a script when it came to managing student behavior, expert teachers had adaptive expertise that allowed them to draw from a variety of strategies depending on the context. So I feel like there is this, with experience, we develop this ability to kind of work within the system, of course, but to navigate it more fluidly. It isn't always as cut and dry, right? So it's something that has to be developed. Now, I didn't want to share this information to make you frustrated if you're a new teacher, because you're like, hey, Rhonda, I'm a novice. How is this helping me? But I think we can steal from what the experts have done, right? And become better, quicker with our classroom management. So if you're in the slides, you should be able to click on this Jamboard. I'd just like you to reflect on those 5 different components that we discussed and write something using a Post-it in the Jamboard. So something that we can learn from this research. What can you do? What did you learn from these experts that might be beneficial in your classroom? So take a moment to think about that. And again, if you're in the bit.ly, you should be able to navigate back to that previous slide.
Hey, Rhonda, can you share the bit.ly link one more time, please?
Absolutely. Let me put it in the chat.
Thank you.
All right. Did it show up in the chat? Good. Okay, thanks. Proactive versus reactive. Yep. Yeah. I'm reading as we go here, the posture, tone, and mood thing was big to me. I think that's a good life lesson in everything, but definitely with kids. Yeah, discipline looks different depending on the student. Some of them look for that negative attention, just as that they're used to negative attention as a form of attention, and we don't want to concede their proximity. Yeah, that's always one of my favorites. Yeah, the witty comebacks. Yes. Root of the behavior. Yes. You are constantly adding to the bag of tricks. And definitely what works for one isn't going to work for the other. And actually, what works for one day might not work the next day, if we're being honest. Yeah. Yeah. The good news is it does get better with time. So, and this was a relatively small research study. Like I said, I think there were 39 people who reviewed the videos, and it didn't list how many videos they reviewed. But we'll talk a little bit coming up about maybe some things that we can learn about our practice that um, like are going to become, I don't know. I think watching yourself on film is like a huge eye opener. Nobody likes to do it, but it's a huge eye opener. And so I learned, for example, that I had a tendency to call on boys more than girls. Which is rare. I still feel like I'm an anomaly, because in an ELA classroom, and I taught advanced classes, there tend to be more girls. So I don't know. I'm a boy mom, so maybe that was it. I had a tendency to look only to my right. So it was just a weirdness. I don't know why. I'm right-handed. Maybe that's why. So when I adjusted seating charts, I would always put kids on the opposite side of the room and move them to the front or the back, so that if because some kids would say, "You never look at me." So it was kind of true. I was always looking to my right. So these are things, again, I would have never known had I not recorded myself. Kind of weird. Okay, so we're going to go back to the presentation. Thank you for sharing. Hopefully some of those takeaways, that expert knowledge will help you back in the classroom. So these are some of the strategies and tips that the experts suggested. This is what they said they felt like best practices that need to be incorporated. So one of the first things was to plan your environment. Now, this is something I think that's like an integral part of being a new teacher. We spend a lot of time thinking about what our classroom setup is, but the decorations, what goes on the walls, where things go, sometimes that stuff isn't done with as much forethought as they are suggesting. So for example, where's the pencil sharpener located in your class? Is it not you, Raquel? Yours doesn't matter because they're at home. And note, guys, some of us are distance learning teachers. So many of you mentioned that your student teaching was distance learning. Sanger has a school now that's entirely distance learning. So Raquel's joining us. I don't know if there was anybody else from Taft, but they're entirely online. So those struggles that you faced, they are her daily life with her 35 or 38 or so, seventh and eighth grade. Double that, right? Sorry. Yeah, seventh and eighth. Okay, so where is the pencil sharpener located? You know, is it in the front of your room so that if a kid needs to get up and sharpen a pencil in the middle of your presentation, they're disrupting everybody, or is it in a like a discrete location? That's a simple example, but when you set up things in your classroom, that's something to think about. I didn't realize, and this was something that I was like, I never thought of that, but are students overstimulated by what is on the walls? What I read in the article is that this is a bigger problem for elementary students, but what is on your walls should be purposeful. It should be engaging. Now, I believe that your classroom is like a reflection of you as a teacher and your personality, and it's one of the ways that you first connect with students. So there has to be that too. But the decorations too much? Are they staring at the decorations and trying to read, all the famous movie lines from that poster with 100, famous movie quotes, instead of looking at the anchor chart with the information that you want them to study? And that those kinds of things are important to consider. Just a quick like visual thumbs up, thumbs down. Thoughts on seating charts? I know seating charts are required, but in terms of you choosing seats for students versus students choosing seats for themselves. Thumbs up means I choose their seats. Thumbs down, they choose. I see a mix. Okay, I see a mix. So according to the research, this studied fifth grade. So this is probably a little bit beneath where most of us are. Choice is bad, according to the study for fifth graders. Students were more likely to get into trouble if they chose their own seat. Okay. Now, that kind of startled me because I used it as a tool, right? I used it as a way like to incentivize to students, like, hey, if you can behave and sit there, then maybe it's a good thing. But they did suggest the idea of compromise, so that maybe teachers choose where students sit, but during certain activities, students get to choose, right? So maybe if it's for a limited time, or again, like incentivize the idea. Or maybe for a week they get to choose where they sit, and then the next week you get to choose. My tactic, I always let them shoot themselves in the foot. That was my belief. So the first couple of days of school, I let them sit wherever they wanted, and I figured out who they would be most talkative with, and then I moved them. And I like way back when I went to when I went through the credential program, they talked about buffer zones. I think I talked about this. Sometimes there are not enough buffers in a classroom. There are only 6 quiet kids and the rest of them are loud. They're all in your 5th period class, probably right after lunch. And so you can't strategically place them. So you have to figure out a way, whether it's the physical environment or just the seating chart. But statistically, students do better if you choose their seats. Just a note to self. Any comments or questions about that? Anybody startled by that? Probably not. All right. So the second thing that they suggested, and this is something that you've likely heard before, was that students should be involved in the creation of classroom norms, right? So these are the general, not rules, but accepted behaviors in your classroom. Students are more likely to adhere to norms if they understand the why behind them. So my thought is the co-creating of the norms allows for that conversation to naturally occur, right? There's a discussion about it. And so as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, okay, it's September 20th. And so typically norms are introduced at the very beginning of the school year and it's the end of September. So now what? Right? If you didn't co-create norms, but you put up your class rules or in your syllabus, you put your expectations, how can you modify that? How can you integrate this idea even though it's the end of September? If it wasn't something that was part of your practice at the beginning of the year. Okay. Oops. Sorry. Crazy mouse. Okay. Any ideas? How you feel free to unmute. Go for it.
I did mine like the first day of school, where they had their, like each class came up with expectations. What do you expect of me? Like, what do you expect of your peers? And then the one that the one that stumped them is, what do you think I should expect of you? That was what I did.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I like that you said, what do you think I should expect of you? Because it's like putting them, making them look from your perspective, the perspective of their teacher. It's good. And how did that come out? Rachel, besides that one you said was more difficult, were they effective?
They were good. Some of the classes, when I asked, what do they expect of me? I had a kid say, don't be a Karen. I mean, they're freshmen, so kind of makes all right. So that's pretty on brand, but they really they knew how they should be acting. And then they liked that every class was able to do it. And then I condensed them into one thing.
That's good. A blend. Good. So did anybody else try that strategy at the beginning of the year?
I came up with a few of my own and then asked for more suggestions instead of doing all of them together.
That's good. You get yours in there for sure. All right, good. So if you didn't, how might you integrate an idea, something like this now? Because it's still valuable.
I mean, if we're talking about doing it now in the middle of September, after we've already had a month of school, trying to identify maybe something that's not working in the classroom and asking them, how do we solve it?
Yeah, I love that idea. What behaviors are you seeing that are causing disruptions on a regular basis? And how can you have a conversation, like an honest conversation? Why is it a problem? Why? So when I was researching for this, one of the things I discovered was an article from 2015 or 17. It's actually linked. I have a resource page in the back about cell phones. And cell phones are such a problem in the classroom, except now, one-to-one devices. So if they put their cell phone down, they have their iPad, and it's hard to tell on any, it's all problematic. But I think one of the things it said was the average age students start bringing cell phones is 10 to school. And so it really made me wonder how often, do kids understand cell phone etiquette? We could ask, do adults understand cell phone etiquette? But what a great opportunity to have a conversation about why do we need to maybe, have a conversation about what's acceptable in the classroom, right? So I agree entirely, Kayla, having a conversation about a problematic behavior is a great way to start a new list of, these are some norms that we have. Okay, good, great idea. Anybody else? I think you seek opportunities to insert it. And even if it's not around a problem behavior, maybe an upcoming assignment, maybe a group project, if you haven't had an opportunity to have a major group project yet, but creating norms around that particular activity or any activity that is new. If you haven't ventured outside of the classroom yet, but you're going to go to the library or you're going to go wherever, kids need instructions. And just because they're secondary students doesn't mean they don't need instructions. We oftentimes presume that, oh, they know that, but they like to be told. Again, they may not like it, but they may need it. All right. Okay. So this one was interesting. This was made by a high school English teacher. But the idea is that you should respond appropriately. And many of you mentioned that, it's not a one size fits all penalty, right? So consequences need to be clear and consistent, but not all off-task behavior warrants the same action, right? And as you go throughout the year, you get to know your kids better, you're going to recognize that, the reaction, like a stern consequence for some kids might be necessary, while the kid next to them, if you give them the look, they're just going to cower and be so sad because they've disappointed you. And so it's important to be able to recognize those differences, but that comes with knowing kids, right? So this high school teacher created a tiered system of consequences in an effort to give students a clear understanding of what was coming if they didn't behave. And so it actually gives kids more choice, right? Now, what it doesn't do is, and that is a clickable link, so it would take you to the website if you were to click on that image. But you can see that using proximity, giving the teacher look that I mentioned, we all know the teacher look. Your teacher look's going to get better too, guys. There's going to be a variety of teachers. You could do like one of those collages with the many faces of you and all the teacher looks that you will become a pro at giving. But the nonverbal cues, saying a student's name, I'm a big like touchy-feely person, and some people hate that, right? So to go stand next to somebody and just be close to them, that's like a sign to get on task, or to tap their shoulder. You have to be careful. But anyway, those kinds of things. And then it just escalates. But so there are step systems, there are all those systems within the schools. But something like this in your classroom might be an idea if you're having lots of problems with discipline. Okay, so just an idea. I thought it was interesting that it was created by an English teacher. Okay, and here we are back to the unspoken behaviors, right? So we talked about nonverbal communication, the eye contact, body language, the position in the classroom being important. I think I've read that well over 50% of communication is nonverbal. I want to say it's like over 70. It might even be more than that. That might be a quote from the movie Hitch. I apologize, but I really think it's like something way up there. But we can't underestimate that nonverbal communication, and then use that idea to develop your teaching presence. So this is where I talked about consider allowing someone to record you. You'll be surprised about the habits you formed and might want to modify already, right? So do you stand in a certain place? Do you look a certain way? Do you only call on, this particular group of students? And it's uncomfortable, right? It's like, I hate being recorded, but I think have somebody record you with your iPad. So nobody else has the recording, only you have it. And then you can watch it and see your patterns. Okay. And I promise you that it will be revealing about like your behaviors, your habits. And then you can modify it, like purposefully think about what you might want to do differently. Okay. So aside from student engagement, this is relationships with your kids. Everything begins and ends with this. You need to get to know them. You need to greet them. You need to check in with them. I'm sure many of you did surveys or letters or getting to know you activities at the beginning of the year where they tell you things about them. Sometimes things you really didn't want to know probably, but they tell you a lot. It's really important that you read and understand that information because it's what's going to tell you the background information that you're not going to get in Power School, right? It's the stuff that makes them react to what's going on in your classroom. And so it's also going to help you get to the root, right? The root of some of their problematic behavior if they're displaying problematic behavior, you know? So what are some things that you have done? And you can go ahead and put this in the chat or you can unmute yourself. What are some things that you've done already to develop those relationships with your students? Favorite holiday is a good idea. I always did favorite candy. Facebook profile. That's a cool idea, Rachel and Adam. Kevin, yeah, greeting kids at the door and just getting a vibe on about their day as they walk in is a great idea. A D&D character sheet. What is that, Ryan? Google Forms. What I need to know what that is. It's hilarious. I really
need Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Do the kids know what that is? Is that popular?
I would imagine you just have them create a character like based on whatever they would imagine their character would be, kind of use their imagination.
Okay, very good. All right. I imagine that would be 50%. Okay, yeah. I mean, I knew that was a thing. I didn't know if it was still a thing. All right. Marianne, 10 to 15 minute meetings every Monday to check in about the weekend. Good. VIP student of the week. These are great things. I feel like, I don't know how you guys feel. I feel sometimes like as secondary teachers, we're cheated because we don't do a lot of the cutesy things they do in elementary school. But a lot of those are strategies to really get to know kids, you know? So like, I don't know, even things like the different roles that they have in elementary classrooms that are like the teacher helper roles. Those don't have to go away because we're secondary teachers. There are things that it would be good to have kids participate in and give them like leadership roles. In a virtual classroom, there's a lot of room for that. I don't know if you guys did any of that in your student teaching, but really things like the Googler, right? Because inevitably when you're talking with your kids in class, there is something that comes up that nobody knows the answer to, but if you could Google it right then, you would have an answer. So somebody could be the Googler. I mean, there's tons of roles that can be rotated. But just the idea of, you know, having them participate. DJ is a great idea. Close to the door person is also a good idea. These could be totally invented roles. And I think that would actually be fun with secondary kids. Like have a couple that you start with, and then as you need something, make it up. Get yourself a wand, christen them or something, whatever works for you. I think that's great. Yeah, so I think Raquel mentioned, wait, what did I see? There was something I saw that I was like, oh, that's good. I lost it. Normally when we do PDs like this, there's somebody to monitor the chat. So I apologize if like when some of you came in late and I didn't have the bit.ly in the chat on my small screen.
Was it temperature checks?
It might have been something about the temperature checks. Advisory. I don't know. It's okay. It was good. Oh, you talk about the Avengers. Talking about characters that are, but it was something else. There was something else. I'll read it later and I'll be like, that's the one. Okay. So, and Jade, I'd like to know more about the mood board activity.
Yeah, so I had created kind of a choice board as far as like a list of questions for them to answer. So it was a lot of like silly things, but some fun things. So like, kind of where they went to elementary school, or, what would be something that represents them, whether it was like an animal or, obviously kind of favorite colors or things like that. But a lot of them, they picked a lot of different varieties. So it was pretty cool.
That's great. At the end, I have a slide I'm going to share with a bunch of resources, and there were a couple that I found that are great class activities to kind of build off of. One specifically, just like building off of things we learned during the pandemic, most of which were not academic, but guaranteed that the kids learned how to do a lot of things. And the pandemic isn't something that we celebrate, other than the fact that, like we're making our way through, but to talk to the kids about things that they've learned in a positive light, I think would be a really fantastic way to connect with kids, things that, that they've learned throughout this. Okay. So we were at relationships, and then choose your battles. So choosing your battles is really important because, as I mentioned before, there are some kids who are used to getting negative attention. They seek it. That's typically the attention that they get. And so then they use that negative attention as a way to disengage, become apathetic, not like you, everything is your fault. So finding a way to connect with those kids is really important, but also extremely challenging. So deciding when you're going to fight that battle, you don't have to fight the battle every day. When you do fight the battle, you have to be prepared to fight. Some days you're going to have to fight the battle. And it's some days going to be with the kid who wants the negative attention. But we can be thoughtful about when we're going to do that, or if we're going to do that every given day. It's also important to remember that you can't fix all the misbehavior in your classroom. If you were doing that, the academic part would probably not get done. But you do want to try to avoid escalating any given situation. And remember that the most effective classroom management strategy is about increasing engagement and developing those relationships so that it doesn't get to a point where you're dealing with the discipline and consequences. And again, in all truth and honesty, you can build those relationships and have great relationships with kids. They can be engaged, and someone's still going to do something dumb, probably right before or after the bell rings. And so it's going to happen. But if you have established those relationships with kids, then they're going to understand, right? That respect is a two-way street. And that even if it comes to discipline, that it is necessary, because my favorite line to kids was when it came to that point where maybe they needed to be removed from class. I appreciate that you're having a bad day, or this is going on, or whatever, but I have 34 other kids who are wanting to learn. And so I need to remove you now, because everybody's education is equally important to yours. So we got to continue. And sometimes they understand that, and sometimes they don't. But I think it's a fair and honest answer if you do have to go to that battle that day. Any question about that, or any situations that anybody wants to discuss in terms of choosing your battles? Because we're a whole group here, so we could do some what ifs. All right.
How would you try to go back on, let's say, so I have a couple kids who have a lot of negative behavior issues every day, and it's like, they see me and they look at me, and it's just like, I can tell they just don't like me because I've had to discipline them for behavioral stuff. And it is that negative behavior loop where they just know that they're going to be acting out and be punished for it. So they don't really care and they just keep doing it. How would you recommend regressing on some of that and maybe trying to work on, because I try to build the relationships with them and talk to them and sit down, but it just, they don't really seem to be interested in even having that relationship with me.
Have you found any commonalities?
Between myself and them?
Like any topics topics of interest that are mutually.
When I try, it's like, it's dead in the water, really. And they probably, I think they have nothing in common with me, which is funny because, you know, I found plenty of those things with my other students. Like you
Right.
said, I have 34 other kids in here who want to be here and are trying and are not being disrespectful. And I don't have any problem making a relationship with them, you know?
Right. And Kevin, what grade level?
These are 10th graders.
Yeah. So that could be the problem. No, just kidding. 10th graders are the hardest grade to teach, guys.
Well, and you know, they had a hard time last year, and then, you know, this is really their first full year of high school.
Yeah.
And so I really feel like they did get cut off on a lot of, you know, and
Yeah.
that's what you're saying, Jade, about excelling when they do praise. And I do try to, you know, positive feedback when they are on task or they are contributing respectfully and positively.
Yeah. That, and continue to do that. If there's a positive that they, you know, look for it, not fake. There's also an article at the end about the fake "I'm proud of you" thing. Kids see through that. So they don't want the false praise, but it has to be genuine. But what you're saying about that skipped, I mean, think about that. They skipped the end of their 8th grade year. They're in most of their freshman year, and now they're back as sophomores. I have taught every grade level at secondary, and sophomores were by far the hardest. I started some years with 34 sophomore students and ended with 18 because they found their way elsewhere. It tends to happen sophomore year. Not to say, Rachel, I see your face, you're like, wait a minute, freshmen are pretty bad. I see your face, but freshmen are like still figuring it out. So there's a little bit, not always, but sometimes, of innocence to their immaturity. Sophomores have figured it out. They just don't know where they fit. And so they're not upperclassmen. They're difficult. So that could be part of it. But I think probably the bigger part is what you're talking about in terms of that gap. Are all of you finding that your kids are struggling behaviorally, socially, being back in the classroom? Yes. Maybe. Looking for attention. A few definitely agreed. Yeah. And I would say, obviously, Kevin, if you have a couple who are clearly having problems, they're standing out even among a group that might be struggling a little bit, and that's really difficult. All I can tell you is to keep trying. Don't force it. Sometimes it takes a long time for kids to warm up, and that might be the case. Maybe talk to their other teachers though. See if they've found any ends. That's another it's another route to take.
Yeah, and I have a para-educator I work with who has them for multiple classes. And so I kind of check in, and they're saying the behavior is pretty standard and consistent across the board in math and in English and social studies. And so that leads me to, you know, draw the conclusions that something for them just isn't really working.
Yeah.
And at the start, I was lenient because the kids actually had IEPs. Like most of the behavioral kids in my class have IEPs. And so, you know, I was trying to do that leeway. I was trying to be, you know, I try to keep in mind, talking with the school psychologist, is that they don't understand how to do it. And so that frustrates them, and that's how they act out. And so I've tried to make the efforts to really explain just to them, even one-on-one, this is what we're doing, this is how you do it, this is how you can start. And I'm still just kind of hitting a wall with the kids who need it the most, which is the frustrating part.
Yeah. So the other thing that you could do is try to talk to the RSP teacher for those students and see if they have, I mean, because sometimes talking to a student one-on-one is going to make them feel like picked on rather than supported, and you're trying to clearly support that student. So maybe approach it that way, indirectly through another person, or get some ideas if it so hard, because the RSP teacher probably knows the student very little because of the circumstances over the last year, but it might be worth a try. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to share, question they want to ask? All right. Okay, so this is a resource page that I've compiled, just some articles that I found like, oh, this is legit. Like I look through them, and but two things that I wanted to focus on. They're the ones that have the hearts by them and the fire, so they're easy to identify, and the big red arrows. So let's start this year by focusing on learning gains. That's the activity I was talking about, and it walks you through the steps of just a way to have a conversation with kids about everything, like address what's happened over the last couple years, but focus on the positives that have emerged from it in terms of their learning. We talk a lot, you watch the news, you hear a lot about how so much is wrong with kids. They've missed so much. We talk about things like learning loss, and then we hear that those are not words we're supposed to use. I really felt that this activity could be very valuable. So I encourage you guys to check that one out. I also liked the article about what to say instead of "I'm proud of you," and we were kind of talking about that that sense of genuine, I don't know, support and appreciation. But what, because really, like to say "I'm proud of you" to some kids might even be condescending. It depends on, knowing those kids. So I thought that one was really good. And then the 8 proactive classroom management tips. So at the very beginning, we talked about, being reactive versus proactive. And so that last article has some really valuable tips that I think would be helpful, in all your free time when you want to do some research on classroom management. So I understand it's a bit idealistic, but those are a ton of resources if you're, up at night, can't figure out what to do, some suggestions for you. All right. So that is the end of my presentation. I put my name, email, phone number. I need you guys to complete the link here is the feedback form. If you could complete that for me. I need you to know that in the next week, you're going to receive an EWA number from Laura Schlunt via email. EWA number is extra work agreement. And so you'll be compensated for 1 hour's time for attending today. Once you've received that number, you're going to submit your employee compensation form, which you will access via Informed K-12. You're going to submit that to Nicole Rosales, who is listed. There's like a gazillion people you can send it to, but you will find her as program coordinator of PD. Okay. So if you, like me, struggled to remember where was that link, what was that called, the Sanger Unified website has educator logins and helpful links. So you can always go to the district website, but Informed K-12 is where you will submit your extra work agreement, your compensation form. So you'll submit 1 hour, it'll be extra time for today's date, and you can put secondary classroom management training or something like that. Okay. And you will be compensated, but please don't forget to leave feedback for today. I very, very much appreciate you guys. I know at the end of the day, everybody wants to go to a training at 3:30 in the afternoon, right? It's what you're living for. So I appreciate that you took the time to come and participate. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions, if there are specific situations that you have questions about involving classroom management, if you're having trouble with your Remind or your Canvas or whatever. I may not be able, I a lot of times can't help with like stuff, but I know who can. So, and I have the time to find them. So please feel free to reach out with whatever you need, and I'm here to support you. So thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful day after you submit your feedback. See ya.